Guys, it's almost the stroke of midnight when all of crypto once again becomes a pumpkin. And a good portion of our fate may lie in the claws of an old owl watching an international duel going down in the distance. If the only duel you're interested in is the one where you have to decide whether to buy a Moon Lambo or a Moon 911, or if you're finding value in these videos, please consider delegating to the Army of Spies DRep address and the Army of Spies stake pool, ticker AOS. Okay, thank you. Thank you for joining. Thank you everybody for joining right now. Who can guess? Can anyone guess who the two duelists are wielding their swords so ferociously at each other? Well, this owl, I think everybody knows who the owl is. I think everybody knows who the old owl is. Can anyone in the comments guess who the two duelists are? I think probably the vast majority of people know who those two duelists are. Let's go. Let's go, Jordan for America. Let's go. Close. Charles is not one of the two duelists. That is not Charles. Charles is not one of the two duelists. Daniil, how's it going? Neo2166, how's it going? Thomas Kirkpatrick, thank you for joining. Jay Marie, thank you for joining. Thanks for being here, as always, guys. So the two duelists are, in fact, the two sort of biggest tariff adversaries in the world right now. Jay Powell is definitely the owl. Yep. Oh, Daniil, got it. Yep. China versus US. That is Uncle Donald and Uncle Chairman Ryan, Xi Jinping, engaged in a battle over tariffs. And here's what's been going on just today. So before today, actually the start of today, earlier today, we saw US President Donald Trump remains on track to meet Chinese leader Xi Jinping, Chairman Ryan, in South Korea in late October. U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said as both sides look to ease tensions following fresh tariff threats and export controls. So the day started out well. This was actually news, I think, from the previous day, whenever Bessent said that. I can't remember if he was on with Maria Bartiromo. Is that her name? Do I have her name right? I can't remember if he was on with her or somebody else, but it was some financial show. And he mentioned that his understanding was that everything was still on track for a meeting this month in South Korea with the president and Chairman Ryan. I can't let go of this idea. There's this idea. If you don't know what I'm talking about, there's this idea, this claim. I'll just call it a claim. So Xi Jinping was an exchange student in like Oklahoma when he was a kid. He like went to high school for a semester or a year or something in Oklahoma. And the story is that he got there and he decided he would, claim an American name instead of going by Xi Jinping. The story is he decided to go by Ryan. So now we have the leader of the CCP, Chairman Ryan. I can't let go of it. The idea that he named himself Ryan is so amazing to me. I can't let go of this. But we got the Donald and the Ryan are supposed to go head to head in October in South Korea. And this is good because that's better than them not talking. The alternative is not so hot. And here later on in the day today, we saw the alternative rearing its head once again. Here's Trump's Truth Social post. I believe that China purposefully not buying our soybeans and causing difficulty for our soybean farmers is an economically hostile act. It's basically war, guys. It's like they set off a tactical nuke in downtown LA. Basically war, not buying our soybeans. We are considering terminating business with China having to do with cooking oil and other elements of trade as retribution. As an example, we can easily produce cooking oil ourselves. We don't need to purchase from China. I'm not making light of the soybean farmers and their plight here. It is soybean harvest season, and soybean is, in fact, an important agricultural commodity in the U.S. It's important to us that China buys the soybeans. I just think it's funny that basically in this war of propaganda, and that's what's going on here on social media, this war of propaganda between Xi Jinping and Donald Trump. To whatever extent, you think that Xi Jinping did not have a stroke 2 days ago, whatever it was, there were lots of reports he had a stroke. And that's what kicked off this latest, iteration of the tariff war, trade war troubles. If it was that, or if it was just like back in July when they said he had a stroke, and apparently he didn't, like he's still here. So maybe he did have a stroke. Maybe he didn't on either occasion. Hey, Corn Sullied, thank you for joining. J. Marie, I think you're right. It is a bit of a Royal Rumble. It's the closest to a Royal Rumble we can get in international political economy, I guess. So, I mean, we obviously the rare earth materials thing is, the first thing you think of. But I think they're sort of just like latching on to, it's sort of like this tit for tat relationship right now. Somehow, things are looking like they're going to converge on some kind of a consensus solution, something that works for both China and for the Trump administration. And then all of a sudden it kicks back off and there's more trouble. And this is the way the Trump administration, likes to negotiate. I say the Trump administration, but we all know it's just, it seems to just really be Donald Trump jumping on Twitter, at whatever time he feels like it, and kicking off posts like this. And lately I think we've seen the kind of the same thing out of the CCP. All of a sudden, I think at a certain point they got sick of these posts coming out of nowhere, and so they started doing things like just suddenly deciding we'll put up a ban on the import of American soybean. So I kind of have this feeling we're going to see this sort of thing going on and on. And if you actually listen to what Jerome Powell has said in every single one of his, sort of public speaking events since the start of all this, including the one today, earlier today, he was in, what was it, Philadelphia with the National Association for Business Economics. He was in Philadelphia. And he gave kind of a long, we see him get up after FOMC meetings and he gives these very, very short, sort of public announcements where he talks about what they did with the federal funds rate and, what the FOMC was thinking about, but they're very, very short. Here we had a much, much longer presentation from Jerome Powell, and he actually did a Q&A session. So we got a little bit more out of him. But every single time he's talked since the start of the tariffs, it's sort of like he's doing his normal owl thing where he definitely wants to give everybody the perception that the Fed is sort of like up in this tree. Notice I'm saying tree, not ivory tower, but it's kind of a tree made out of ivory that looks like a tower. They're sort of up in this tree, just watching the mice scurry around, and they're so non-political. They certainly they're not doing anything because anybody over at the Fed or on the FOMC hates Trump passionately, which is obviously the case. Trump and Jerome Powell do not get along at all. These two obviously hate each other. So I think Trump would end up hating whoever is chair of the Fed. Like he's going to hate that person no matter what. And any president, is going to have feelings of aggression towards that person, basically, because whoever is in charge of the White House is always going to want lower rates. And they're going to want certain things to happen they would prefer for certain things to be happening to the Fed balance sheet. But on that topic, here's what Jerome Powell actually talked about today at this Philadelphia National Association for Business Economics summit. He got some kind of an award and went on and on about how prestigious an award it was and how pleased he was to receive the award. But it seems like every time I see him talk, and it's not right after one of these FOMC meetings, it's always somebody giving him some award. It's sort of, like the bait. It's sort of like the bait to get him to come speak at these kinds of events. But you probably saw some of the headlines today on X. The main headline people went with, though, is it's the way the things he says are presented on social media are always like this sort of like much more certain version of what he actually said, much more decisive. And if you listen to his actual verbiage, it's always way more wishy-washy than it's presented on social media. But in some ways, that social media presentation of what he said is actually maybe more accurate than what he actually said in some cases, because his whole job is not, is to sort of give people clues as to what the Fed is thinking about without actually like disrupting the market. So one of the first big themes of his presentation today was that the Fed is indeed walking this tightrope, the same tightrope that everybody thinks they've been walking. He describes it as, if we move too fast, we might leave the inflation job undone. If we move too slow, we might experience loss in the form of employment risk. So what he's saying is, we've got this crazy amount of inflation. And he's been more than happy to hint that it's all due to tariffs, right? Which is pretty convenient for him. Actually, one of the more convenient things that's happened was that the Fed, prior to the Trump administration coming back into the White House, the Fed was fighting inflation. Inflation was a huge problem, hence the very, very high interest rates, maybe not historically high, but, high given where we've been recently. So it's very convenient, actually, when Trump came in and all of a sudden kicked off this whole tariff thing that we haven't seen in modern times. We haven't seen tariffs like this in modern times. It's a brand new thing. This novel experiment in our economic relationships with other, nation states. How about if we just tariff all of you? This was this brand new, crazy, wild, radical experiment. Very convenient for Jerome Powell, though. I actually like Jerome Powell. I think he's obviously a very, very smart guy. It's kind of amazing. He's an attorney. He's an attorney who became head of the Fed, right? Which is not what you usually imagine from the outside. You imagine it just being some like very, very academic economist, but that's not what we always get. And in this case, or some professor of economics, something like that. In this case, we get an attorney. So, and the way he communicates is, not unlike an attorney. But he's basically saying like, hey, he doesn't mention this part, but the situation is that when the Trump administration came in, they were already fighting inflation. The biggest fight in front of the Fed was inflation, high interest rates. Then Trump comes in and he throws down this crazy volley of tariffs, right? And I'm not proclaiming any judgment on those tariffs. Will history judge this tariff initiative kindly or harshly? I don't know. I honestly don't know. It's kind of a novel experiment for the United States. It's nothing we've done before. Is it fair to the other countries? You can come to your own decision on that. Certainly, in a lot of cases, we're just now treating other countries the same way they've always treated us. I mean, I think most people who watch this channel know occasionally I sort of seasonally migrate to a whole different place, a whole different continent, a whole different part of the world than the one I'm in, the other part of, my time. And in that other country I go to, there are crazy tariffs on everybody. It's been amazing to me how expensive it is to buy certain things. If things are made there, they can be very reasonably priced. But if anything's made anywhere else, there are these crazy tariffs. And I've always wondered, how do they get away with this? How come the other countries don't match their tariffs? Pretty easy to do. And this is the kind of thing that economists, for a long, long, long time have written a lot of books about, a lot of analysis, a lot of conjecture. Now that whole experiment's being done. What if the US just starts tariffing everybody? Anyways, very convenient for the owl, because now the owl can say, hey, we've got to do the following things because we're fighting inflation. Previous to this whole tariff thing, the next question people would ask would be, why is there inflation in the first place? Is it possibly because of the expansion of M2 during COVID, when we went from 15 trillion to whatever we ended up at, 21, 22 trillion eventually, whatever it was? Is that the reason why there's inflation? Because it's kind of definitional inflation of that number, the number going from 15 trillion to above 20 trillion to deal with that whole COVID shutdown thing. Definitionally, that number inflated. That was the problem before. But now the tariffs are here. So instead of saying that, he can talk about inflation and, just kind of casually mention the tariffs. And it's a great way to create this enemy the Fed is fighting, and it no longer has to be a self-created enemy. Again, I'm not blaming Jerome Powell here. He's doing the rational thing. I think this is what any Fed chair would be doing right now, but he's very much painting inflation as being a creature of the tariffs and that being the main enemy they're fighting. But with this appearance, he's also talking about what he described as downside risks to employment appearing to have risen. So this is one of the first time he's acknowledging. Previous to this, it seemed like mainly what we heard was employment still looks good. I don't know what you guys are talking about. We don't need to drop the rates. Employment still looks good. And then, of course, in the September meeting, we saw them make a cut finally. For most people in crypto, it was finally. And also a lot of signaling there will be 2 more cuts before 2025 is up. And now they're kind of following that up with, yeah, we think there is significant downside risk to employment. So they're saying they can't move too slow because we might experience loss in the form of employment risk. And of course, this has always been the case for the Fed. This is nothing new. This is the dual mandate of the Fed. The dual mandate of the Fed is to keep inflation in check and also to keep unemployment in check. So this is the same mission they've always had. So here's the more interesting part. All of that is basically nothing new. This is the same thing he's always been saying. Now he's just acknowledging, a slightly greater perception of unemployment risk. Here's the interesting part, though. He also said, since June 2022, they've reduced the Fed balance sheet by 2.2 trillion. That's 2.2 trillion, trillion with a T, $2.2 trillion from 35% of GDP to 22% of GDP. So you'll hear a lot of people, especially people who are in crypto or crypto adjacent, we talk a lot about liquidity for good reason. And, I think one of the clearest things anybody has said about liquidity is that it doesn't matter how you measure liquidity. If you measure it by US M2, global M2, Fed balance sheet, it doesn't matter. It all equals liquidity. And when you think about this, the Fed balance sheet being at 35% of gross domestic product, that's kind of insane. This is like the nightmare for von Mises, Hayek. This is exactly what the Austrian economists, this is the opposite of the Austrian economic stream. This is exactly the kind of thing the Austrian economists were warning us about. When your central bank has a balance sheet that's a third the size of your gross domestic product, that's a problem. So of course, if you're at all, if you have any leanings towards Austrian economics, you hear that we went from 35% of GDP to 22% of GDP. That's a good start, but it's still way too high. 22% of GDP, still way too high. So the good news is this. He followed that up by saying, our long-stated plan is to stop balance sheet runoff. So balance sheet runoff, this is reducing the size of the balance sheet. So now we're getting into weird territory here, right? Like, crypto is often very strongly correlated with Austrian economics and the ideals of Austrian economics. So, like I just said, von Mises and Hayek, they might say, terrible that you were at 35% of GDP. A good, not even a good start, but at least a start going from 35% to 22%. And this balance sheet runoff maybe should just continue. Maybe the central bank shouldn't be holding that many trillions of dollars of assets, on their balance sheet. But in crypto, what we also know, even though we're so strongly, associated with Austrian economics in a lot of cases, what we also know is that liquidity is very good for the crypto space. And the Fed balance sheet, M2, global M2, all these things are, can sort of be equated with, sort of metrics of liquidity. So here we're caught in this, just as Jerome Powell is walking this tightrope between unemployment and between unemployment risk and inflation risks. We're sort of like caught in this weird philosophical space where I think a lot of people in crypto, at least, feel something for Austrian economics. But at the same time, we know the liquidity is very good. Money printing is very good. So when Jerome Powell says, our long-standing plan is to stop balance sheet runoff when reserves are somewhat above the level we judge consistent with ample reserve conditions. So he's saying their plan is to stop balance sheet runoff, and then just kind of a word salad that doesn't really matter. But what he follows that up with is we may approach that point in coming months. And you got to admit, when he says when reserves are somewhat above the level we judge consistent with ample reserve conditions, it, it, it's basically just like when they feel it's good, when they feel it's good. But the important part here is that last part. He said we may approach that point in the coming months. So what he's saying is reducing the size of the Fed balance sheet may cease in the coming months. This is very good news for liquidity, very bad news if you're still harboring any notion of an Austrian economic stream for the US. But I think everybody knows that ship has long sailed. We're not going to see that. There will be no Austrian economics for the US. It is just straight up monetary manipulation. That's what's going on here. I think we all know we live in that world. But Jerome Powell, for crypto, there is some good news in this, that at least the runoff of the balance sheet may stop soon. So shifting gears here a little bit, here's a little bit more news that's not really news to anyone in Cardano, I think. So here's a post that says from this person, Dory at Dory _coin, I think that says, my post comparing MEV on Cardano and Ethereum was featured as an article on TradingView News. It's being covered not just internationally, but in several Korean news outlets as well. I'm so proud the word about Cardano's strengths can be shared with so many people this way. As someone who loves Cardano and is active as a DRep, I feel like one of my roles is to let people know about Cardano and contribute to the ecosystem expansion. Even if my contribution is small, I'll keep working at it consistently. Cardano is for the people. I think this is great. These kinds of posts are great. Obviously, this got picked up. One of her posts got picked up by TradingView. Her actual post was, if a bank used its customers' transaction data to profit off them, that would obviously be a problem. But in crypto, exploiting others' transaction data for profit, better known as MEV, has become normalized and even turned into a business. The screenshot shows MEV bots, and then she goes on to explain what the MEV bots are doing. So I think everybody who watches this channel knows what's going on in here. In the EVM world, we have what used to be called minor extractable value. Now they've turned into this euphemism where they say it's called maximum extractable value to make it sound like less bad. Hey, Cardano Fly, thank you for joining. Good evening. Mission Zambia, good morning. Good to see you again. So we've talked about this many times on the channel. So the whole problem is they have a global mempool in EVM blockchains generally. And so you can go into that mempool, pick out a transaction that you know is going to move the price. So let's say you see a big purchase in there. A big purchase is going to go down. You're a validator. So you can grab that transaction and you can say, before I include that transaction in a block, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my own transaction in there, where let's say the transaction you're grabbing is like this gigantic purchase that you know is going to move the price a little bit. So then you sandwich that transaction. This is like a sandwich attack. You sandwich that transaction between two transactions of your own. If it's a giant purchase that is going to move the markets, you can make your own small purchase before that transaction. And of course, this is a market. So your own small purchase is going to also move the market a little bit. Maybe not as much as that big transaction that you're attacking. So you have a purchase before that bigger purchase, and then you have a sale on the other side, a disposition of those same assets on the other side. So you buy that same asset, then you let that big transaction come in, and it moves the price really high. And then after the price has been moved really high, you sell on the other side of it. You just made some money for nothing. And it's almost guaranteed because you're the one including these transactions in the block. So obviously that sucks for the person who got sandwich attacked because your little transaction beforehand actually moved the price higher for that transaction. So they lost a little bit of money, and then you're selling on the other side. So you're making a bunch of money. It's a terrible thing. And I think Dory, this poster Dory_coin, makes the right point here. If a bank used its customers' transaction data to profit off them, that would obviously be a problem. This is something we would never tolerate in the real commercial world. If banks did this, it would be a huge problem. People in Congress would be talking about it. And yet in the EVM world, this is so normal at this point, it's expected. You just have to sort of expect that this is going to happen in the EVM world. In Cardano, as Dory points out here, we don't have this global mempool validation happens locally. So we don't have quite the same problem. In truth, as we've covered previously on this channel, there are ways that validators, operating inside certain platforms and under certain circumstances can do similar stuff to your transactions. Even in Cardano, this is something that could happen, but not on the scale it's happening in the EVM world. In the EVM world, it's just a part of their world. In Cardano, it's something that can happen in certain circumstances, but it can't happen so easily. I think this is one of those fundamental things. It's like self-custodied staking. Hill Dog, good to see you, and thank you for that comment. I appreciate it. This is just like the self-custodied staking thing. There are certain like black and white things that are just objectively better in Cardano, but they're a little bit complicated, like self-custodied staking. If I try to explain to, some, let's say somebody's 70-year-old mom who is at some point in the future, let's say, thinking of, buying some ETF, buying some fund with their 401 in their side their 401k. One fund includes Cardano, one includes, Ethereum, and I go to them and I start explaining to them how MEV is much less prevalent in Cardano. They're not even going to understand the terminology. They're not even going to understand what I'm talking about. If I explain to them the benefits of self-custodied staking, maybe I can make that case. Maybe I can make them understand what I'm talking about with self-custodied staking, but still, it's still difficult because they're just going to be holding this fund in their 401k. Why would they care about staking? They're not ever going to engage in staking. And even outside of that future 401k scenario, if you just say the average person buying on Coinbase, it also doesn't matter to them. The average low information, super low information retail person, not the kind of person who's watching channels like this, crypto channels, the kind of person who just hears about crypto, hears about Coinbase, goes on Coinbase. They have their choice between Ethereum and Cardano and a million other cryptocurrencies. Obviously, for them, they are not abnormal or low information. From their perspective, they're just like everybody else, and they're actually right. We're actually wrong. We're so far out on the information curve compared to the average person in retail and crypto. The average person in retail and crypto is that person who goes on Coinbase and has heard the name Cardano, has heard the name Ethereum, but doesn't know that much beyond that. Maybe they've seen a picture of Charles. Maybe they've seen a picture of Vitalik. Maybe they've even heard them speak, but they don't understand any of the real differences. They just see the market cap of Ethereum. They hear more people talking about Ethereum because it's a bigger ecosystem. This is why we have these certain points that are so objectively, obviously weighing in the direction of Cardano, and yet we still see so many people pouring into these blockchains like Ethereum that in a lot of ways objectively are just worse, but they still see greater adoption. It's because a lot of the stuff is so complicated. I'm never going to be able to explain to that super low information retail person on who never leaves Coinbase what minor extractable value is. They're never going to understand what MEV is. They're never going to understand the advantages of self-custodied staking because they're never going to stake outside of Coinbase. I think this explains a lot of this sort of dichotomy. Like all of us, we're so much further out on the information curve. We see these things and we're like, why is Ethereum still doing so great when objectively it's so much worse in so many ways? It's because of this. It's because the average person in crypto will never get that far out on the information curve. They'll never be where anybody who would ever listen to this channel or any other channel like it could be. Any other true crypto person just has so much more information that the average person will never have. So anyways, I thought that was good. Even though this is a topic we've covered many times on this channel and is discussed quite a bit in crypto, I thought this was a great example of that sort of phenomenon, how the information, the asymmetric information between people like you listening to a channel like this and the actual average person in crypto. Because we all sort of think that we're like the average person in crypto. We are not. We are not. If you've ever even heard of this channel, you are not the average person in crypto. You are unbelievably further out on the information curve. And it's not, I'm not saying that's because you listen to this channel. I'm just saying it's because you listen to crypto channels. You're consuming information that the average person will never see. So today was once again kind of a light news day. So I think that I really do think one of the biggest things going down though is whether or not the owl watching this duel go down between Chairman Ryan and Chairman Donald. We've got the two chairmen. They're having an economic sword fight. They're I'm laughing. B117, we smoke our crypto here. Fair enough. Fair enough. You are all welcome to do whatever you like while you're watching this channel. But the question that I think about quite a bit is what the owl is going to do. So he sees this little sword fight going down. And we all know, even though he paints himself as being up, in this sort of, ivory tower of a tree. And not being a part of partisan politics, not doing things because he hates Trump, all these things. But he sort of has this choice. He watches this duel go down. And the first uncertainty is like, are they going to be able to resolve this duel by the end of the year? Because crypto's sort of on this countdown timer. We've had this 4-year cycle for a long time, and we're in the 4th year of that 4-year cycle, and we're in Q4 of the 4th year. So there's kind of this countdown timer. We don't know when it ends. Does it end in December? Does it end, next May after the new chairman of the Fed, is put in place, because that's when the owl's tenure ends. Does it end sometime in between them? Then, January, February, March, April, does it end sometime in that period? Does it end at a totally different time? We don't know. But what we know is that historically, crypto has always been on this timer. The big first uncertainty is whether or not this duel is going to be complete. Are they going to be able to come to some kind of a consensus? And I kind of think it's sort of a question of what the Trump administration is willing to accept. Yep, I agree. I said this last night, Blue Mammal. Being wrong and being early feel precisely the same and they're indistinguishable. Being too early and being wrong are indistinguishable. But the first, it's sort of like, will Trump be able, what will he accept? Right now, we sort of get this pre-ante status quo where the US wasn't tariffing China, in any way close to the level that the Trump administration has proposed. So we've got the pre-ante status quo. The Trump administration could, they could be thinking about these threats about rare earth materials. Everybody already knows this, but the rare earth materials, it's not like China has the only deposits of rare earth metals, rare earth materials. The problem is they're the only ones who have the refining capacity. So even though they're called rare earths, they're actually quite common around the world. They're much more common than some other very common metals that we deal with on a daily basis. But ever since something like the 1950s, the US had the most refining capability for rare earth materials. And China just started building up those capabilities with more lax environmental standards, all those things. Until today, they have almost all of the refining capability. This is why last year we saw Elon Musk come out and say that if we wanted to create, like a lithium refining facility in the US, it would basically be like printing money. But in fact, China has almost complete control over the refining. So even though we have deposits in many, many other places, and they're constantly discovering new deposits of some of these rare earth materials, even inside the continental US, we just don't have the refining capabilities. So the Trump administration could look at that and say, this is too big a hill to climb. We're just going to default back to pre-ante status quo. We'll tariff some things that China doesn't care about that aren't a big, aren't of high economic value. Xi Jinping and the CCP will accept that. And it'll just be this like symbolic victory that we know is actually not substantive, when in fact, in reality, we're actually defaulting back to status quo. That's like one possibility of the future. Another possibility is that it's the CCP that blinks. The CCP looks and says, hey, even though, we obviously are selling a lot to Europe, we're developing new markets. We're selling in places like Africa, which has some of the best demographics in the world. Even with all that, the US is still an important market. And if we get locked out of the US market, if we're no longer able to sell our goods inside the US market, that's too much of a danger. So we'll actually, turn off the road in this game of chicken, and we'll accept some level of tariffing that is beyond the pre-ante status quo. So, let me get the first part of this. I just want to be able to collateralize a farming or LP position on a protocol like Liquid, and while we're at it, limit style orders to withdraw LP positions at certain rations. Is that within the realm of possibility? I just want to be able to collateralize a farming or LP position on a protocol like Liquid, and while we're at it, limit style orders, withdraw LP positions at certain rations. Oh God. The DeFi capabilities of individual platforms are definitely beyond the scope of this channel. I think there's probably, I don't know if there are channels that just discuss DeFi in Cardano. You guys can tell me, are there channels in Cardano that just discuss Cardano DeFi? I think everybody is kind of a little bit more general than that. I know there are channels that do like to discuss DeFi at that level of detail, but no, I do not. Do you modify your voice? I do not modify my voice. No, I do not modify my voice. But we don't know. We don't know. Whichever side blinks, the CCP or the Trump administration, we don't know if there will be any. We don't know if there will be any acceptance of anything other than the pre-ante status quo by either side. We don't know if the CCP would accept anything other than the pre-ante status quo. We don't know if Trump would be willing to accept the pre-ante status quo. So obviously there's going to be some kind of resolution to all this, because if there's no resolution, then we end up in this world kind of like, something like what Peter Zion has been predicting for the last couple of years, that the world is going to break up into trading blocks, and the US would have a trading block that would be, like the Five Eyes countries, like the US, Canada, the UK, New Zealand, Australia, and then Japan, Korea, the EU, and whoever else, we can come to a deal with to be included in our trading block. And then China would have its own trading block, and then there'd be other trading blocks. So the problem is, if we're not able to come to some kind of a conclusion to this little international duel between Chairman Donald and Chairman Ryan, it would amount to the non-inclusion of China in the US trading bloc, which would change everything. Because I think you can say that the US is sort of pulling back from being the world police. to the credit of the people who say that this is inevitably going to happen, the world's going to break up into trading blocks and we'll no longer have this globalistic trade. The US does seem to be pulling back from caring as much about sort of policing the blue water, trading routes, all those kinds of things. So we don't know if this is going to happen. We don't know. So I think there has to be some kind of at least short-term resolution. Maybe the people that are championing this thesis that we're going to break up into these trading blocks, maybe they're right in the long term, but I don't think the global economy could handle that kind of a breakup on a very, very quick short-term basis. So I think we have to have some kind of resolution of this duel in the short term. Whether or not that happens before, to the extent you believe the crypto cycle still exists, whether or not that happens before the crypto cycle is over and we're already on the way down, that's the part I don't know. That's why I made that video, 2025 versus 2026, because we don't know if the crypto cycle is still alive. We don't know when it's going to end. And we don't know when this little duel is going to be over. And we also don't know how the owl is going to react to that. Right now, the tariffs are sort of a good foil for Jerome Powell. But we don't know if he's going to decide to just chill, not do anything that would help liquidity, do the absolute minimum that he can get away with until it's time for him to retire from his chair position in May. Maybe he'll do that. Maybe he hates Trump so bad that he'll try to push things in the direction of helping with liquidity as little as possible until May, just knowing that Trump's going to appoint somebody in that position who is absolutely going to have commitments to him to increase liquidity. Because while Trump, is not, this will be his final term, he won't be up for re-election after this term, I think he does care about his legacy. He, of course, does care about his legacy. And it seems like for him, one of the most important metrics for that legacy is the health of the economy. He's a business guy through and through. So I think he really does care about his legacy in terms of how the economy is doing. So here's a good example. Hilldog says Cardano with Paul talks a lot of DeFi. Cardano with Paul has a fantastic channel. I would say his channel, if he talks a lot about DeFi, I would say that would be a great place for those kinds of questions. Fly Over Me says this cycle is going to be a long one. The owl is for the economy as Gensler was for crypto. I'm definitely of two minds when it comes to the owl, because the owl, when I listen to him speak, he seems like a very smart and, more importantly, very reasonable guy. He seems like, and maybe this is his genius. Maybe his presentation just tricks me into believing this. But when I hear him talk, I think he's a guy who made plenty of money during his, pre-Fed career. And now he's just doing what he can because he cares about the American people and the people of the world. Let's face it, the impact of the Fed's decisions, that impact extends to the entire globe. I think he really does convince me when I hear him speak that he cares about the welfare of the average person, and he knows the decisions of the Fed can impact, sort of the welfare of the average person. Again, you could say that this is just him caring about his legacy, but he actually does convince me he at least believes he's making decisions for the average person out there. Wade Robinson says, we have to outlast Xi and pray for another moderate leader, or at least a Chinese leader who realizes they're losing their leverage precipitously. Yeah, I watch, I've mentioned this before on the channel, but I watch the China show quite a bit. And while that's definitely sort of like, that's one end of the spectrum of commentary on sort of internal Chinese CCP politics, and sort of their effect on China. The other end kind of being the tankies who are, just like spouting CCP propaganda. I think everybody realizes that there's a lot of guys on YouTube who just do channels about China who are straight up being paid by the CCP in one way or another to just regurgitate Chinese propaganda, not even Chinese propaganda. We'll just say CCP propaganda. But the more I see of sort of like everything on that spectrum, the more I believe you're right. I believe you're right, Wade Robinson. We probably have to outlast Xi and hope for a more moderate leader. It seems like um, the best times in the relationship between the U.S. and China have always been when we lose a more aggressive leader in China and we gain a more moderate one. I think that's definitely true. Hilldog, I agree with you on his presentation. Very sober and believable. Yeah, he just seems like your very caring uncle. He seems like this uncle who's like always very neutral and caring, like, you know, not really stern, but you kind of know he's not going to like, you know, he's not going to like you like drink as a 12-year-old, but he's also not going to tell you that you should never drink, you know, when you're of age. He kind of just seems like, yeah, that's sober, believable. And I know you're using the word sober, not in the sense of drinking and not drinking, but just like, you know, very reasonable guy. But he seems like that kind of uncle, the kind of uncle who would just kind of give it to you straight without being overly harsh, you know, to the point that you don't believe what they're saying, but also not let you get away with anything. He does seem like that kind of uncle. What he's going to do, I mean, I sort of think that there's no way for us to predict when this Chairman Donald thing is going to resolve itself. What the owl does in the meantime, though, whether he makes it easy on us in terms of liquidity or does the bare minimum in terms of liquidity, you know, all of which the fact we're even discussing this is kind of, like I said, kind of an Austrian economics nightmare. But what he does, I think, is almost in a weird way, I feel like the markets have sort of priced in the uncertainty of the tariff war. Like, we don't know what's going to happen. We've got, you know, Captain Wildcard in the White House. He might tweet anything on any given day. That uncertainty is kind of priced in. What Powell does is a little bit more interesting to me because Trump could do anything on any given day. He could tweet anything out and it wouldn't shock me, you know. What Powell does is more interesting because Powell he's not this wild card. He definitely tries to build momentum, you know, like any Fed chair, build momentum in a certain direction and, you know, claim that it's all very data dependent. It all depends on the data, you know, nothing is political, you know, they don't care about anything but their dual mandate, you know, keep inflation in check, you know, support healthy employment numbers. But, you know, Powell, he could put his talent on the scale. He could put his talent on the scale in one direction or the other, you know, more liquidity or less. And whether he does that in 2025 or in early 2026, whenever this cycle is going to end, you know, if you continue to believe in the cycle, I think that's going to have a pretty big impact on our future in crypto. I wish this wasn't all going down. When I first realized that Trump was serious about the tariffs, when he came into office and he got real serious about the tariffs, I kind of imagined us being in this exact scenario because I think we all knew that the big problem with the tariffs was going to be China. China probably would not roll over on the tariff thing. They wouldn't just take that hit. And if they're not going to take the hit, it's sort of like, are we going to face huge amounts of inflation, you know, due to the tariffs? And that's a very politicized issue right now. I think you got people on the right and the left claiming, you know, that's that's you know, some kind of a red herring. Like that's not a logical, you know, conclusion to tariffs. And you got people on the right saying that, and then people on the left are saying all of the inflation is due to tariffs, you know, despite the fact that we had inflation beforehand. So I think I think this image of the Fed and all the central banks of the world watching this duel go down, probably it's sort of business as usual for international, you know, political economics. But for us, the timing is especially bad. I knew at the start of this administration, when I realized to be serious about the tariffs, that we were going to sort of end up in this situation. I was just crossing my fingers that everything got resolved. All the tariffs got resolved. then maybe, China wouldn't care. They would either pass the cost of the tariffs on to the consumer, or they would eat some of the costs. I was hoping it would get resolved one way or another before we got down to Q4 of year 4 of the cycle. Yet here we are, and we don't know. There's no way to gain any certainty about which way it's going to go. Wade Robinson says, I think JP will try to keep his facade of objectivity up and not do anything that overtly supports Trump, as in Singing in the Rain, dignity, always dignity. Yeah, no, I think that's right. I think the last thing he would ever do is anything that suggests he was caving to pressure from Chairman Donald. I think that is the last thing he would ever do. Their entire relationship was summed up to me in those video clips when Trump went over and reviewed the remodeling of I believe it's called the Eccles building that the Fed's in. When Trump was over there reviewing the remodeling and making a big deal about the budget running over and trying to claim that he could get rid of Powell, that whole episode, I think, sort of summed up the relationship between the two. By the way, were you the guy who made up nicknames for all your friends? I definitely did a sport. I did a sport for a long time where everybody had nicknames for sure that were not their normal names. So yeah, that's kind of true. I definitely did this thing where everybody we were dealing with had a name that was not their actual name. So yeah, that's definitely true. But I think that's about all the important news that I saw come up today. Was there any other news? Did anybody else see any other news? Anything else that anybody thinks we should discuss? I think that was about it for today. It's weird. I feel like whenever we come off these 3-day weekends, Hill Dog, that is something I would love to talk about. There are so many things. I probably consume as much news on this topic as I do about anything else. It's I almost feel like I can't do it justice. It would almost have to be its own channel to address this. It would almost have to be its own channel. There's so many things I want to say about that. But yeah, that would almost have to be its own channel. And it's yeah, I won't even start. I keep feeling myself tempted to go down that road, and I actually almost included a big news item about it, but I've done that in the past. I've sort of ventured into those territories in the past because it's I think it's very important. These issues are very important, but it's I think there's also value in having a channel focused on Cardano where you can watch the channel regardless of your political inclinations. I know that's not totally true, but I try to keep it a little bit focused on Cardano. So yeah, I think the last few days were incredible days, though. I agree with that sentiment very much. Charles did the keynote in Singapore. Yeah, I haven't watched it yet. The Token 2049, is that what it's called? Token 2049. I haven't watched that one yet. I have watched all of Charles's other recent stuff. I think the big thing with Charles, what I'm really waiting for is the launch of sort of like the first Glacier drop airdrop when we actually get our hands on those coins. I'm waiting for that in the actual launch of midnight. I think that's when it'll get really interesting on the Charles front. Okay. J. Marie says, here's a little Cardano community news. I made a film of Rare Evo and it'll be releasing on stuff.io on Friday. It's called Community, a film about Cardano. I made it for the community. That sounds excellent. That sounds excellent. Congratulations on finishing that and getting it launched on stuff.io. That is certainly the place to launch a documentary inside the Cardano community. So I think you're launching it exactly the right place. And it's the perfect title because I mean, that is really I think even everybody outside of Cardano agrees the strength of Cardano is its community. So you're probably making a documentary about the most important thing in Cardano. So I look forward to So I just want to say that I value your opinion. Thank you for taking the time to make them, bro. Thank you, Gustavo Morales. Thank you for jumping on and saying that. I appreciate it. Yeah, I mean, so my opinion on all these questions having to do with this topic would be pretty pretty outspoken and polarizing, I think, to and everybody could probably guess who that would be polarizing to, but yeah, I think it would be there are certain people who watch this podcast, and I know it's difficult. It's difficult for them to reconcile sort of someone's political views, especially when it comes to geopolitics. I think for some reason, someone's political views, reconciling those views with sort of our shared interest in Cardano. So I try to preserve a little bit of that, but I could definitely make a whole channel just about these kind of topics. So this is okay. This is very on point for Cardano. I think so. We've only got so many days before we have to get a decision on the Cardano ETFs, plural at this point. The problem I think we're running into is the government shutdown, because it's not like a normal corporation, right? The federal government is not like a normal corporation where it's sort of like, oh, it's this random bank holiday, but actually the CEO is still working, and if anything important had to happen, the CEO is going to make sure it happens. That's not how federal government shutdowns work. Like today in his speech in Philadelphia, I think it was in Philadelphia, even Jerome Powell was saying that it's sort of a weird time for them at the Fed because they can't get any of the normal numbers. They can't get any of the normal inflation numbers right now. They can't get the normal employment numbers, and they're having to rely on the same numbers that, like YouTubers are using from ADP. They're having to rely on these private third-party numbers. And he just straight up said, they're not, that's not the data standard we're used to. We can't really rely on those numbers. Of course, we're going to use them to supplement the nothing that we're currently getting out of the government, but we can't really do the same things we normally do because we don't have these government numbers, which are, to him, the gold standard for data. It's kind of the same thing on this ETF thing. It's like when the federal government shuts down, there is no CEO, at the startup who's working weekends. It's like they shut down and everything shuts down. So I don't know how it's going to impact the ETF deadline, what's going to happen. Again, very bad timing. I think the tariff thing in year 4 of the cycle, very bad timing. I think the government shutdown right before we're supposed to get a decision on our Cardano ETFs, very bad timing. Can we have an episode where we discuss distribution of staking in Cardano and how the protocol can incentivize delegation to small pools? Yeah, this is something we've talked about quite a bit in the past. Obviously, I've been pretty active. I was very active when we were first, there was some before we even had DReps, we had sort of some polling about different protocol metrics related to decentralization in stake pools, and I was pretty outspoken about that. So I've made a bunch of videos in the past about that. When that big poll went down with all the stake pools, I was like very, very active in lobbying people in a certain direction. So I think it's complicated though. So the Cardano protocol was obviously designed to promote decentralization of stake pools up front. And one of the beautiful things is no matter how decentralized we are, because we are the most decentralized of the large cap blockchains, we are by far the most decentralized. Just look at the Edinburgh Decentralization Index, which is, to the best of my understanding, a completely peer reviewable set of metrics. We're the most decentralized out of all the big blockchains. And yet the great thing is the Cardano community will never be satisfied. We always want more decentralization, which I support. I'm all about it. I'm all about driving even more decentralization, incentivizing delegation to smaller pools. I'm all for that. I think it's great that we'll never be satisfied, But yeah, it's a complicated topic because the Cardano protocol is kind of its own little new experiment in the world of blockchains. And it seems to be working, quite well. Can it work even better? I hope so. Okay, what do you think are some of the most likely partner chains to join our ecosystem like Midnight has done, and would each include a glacier drop? Um, so I've actually gotten, I've actually had somebody tell me in PMs what they think I've had somebody tell me that Midnight is the partner chain for this year, and blank is going to be the partner chain for next year. And I won't say what that name was because I have no way to verify what I was told, and it wasn't by anybody. I wasn't told this by, it was secondhand information. I wasn't told this by anybody inside IOG or anything like that. So it's a source. It's in, it's information I can't verify basically. So I won't say what it was, but the name I was told was a name everybody's familiar with, and it's not like a big outside party. It's not some kind of gigantic outside party that would shock everybody. It wasn't like, oh, the partner chain next year is Google chain. It wasn't something like that. It was something much less surprising, and not even an external thing. So that's all I've heard. Who do you think some of the most likely partner chains? I don't know who's likely because I in some ways, and it has to be this way, IOG is a little bit of a black box, right? They have to, I assume, sign NDAs with people they're talking to when they're talking to, especially these, especially like big tech entities. I assume there's a lot of NDA signing going on, and they can't talk about certain things. So if they want to be able to negotiate with these possible partners, I think they have to be a little bit of a black box. The bad part about that is all we can do is speculate. So last night on the channel, we talked about the whole SpaceX mystery. Charles had that whole episode where he went to SpaceX and he took the pictures of himself at SpaceX, and we were all hoping, are they going to launch, a Cardano validator CubeSat? Are we going to have a Cardano stake pool living on a satellite in space delivered by SpaceX, something like that? Is it even something cooler? What is it? And I think Charles, in that case, Charles has even mentioned having signed NDAs. So yeah, all we can do is speculate, and I have no idea. Who do I hope it is? Who do I hope we have a partner chain with? So here's one of the things I used to think about a lot, and it hasn't really come up a lot lately. But one of those things is the fact that X seemed to obviously be preparing to be the world's biggest crypto wallet, basically. Like, it seemed like X was getting these money transmitter licenses in various states. Uncle Thanos, thank you for joining. Appreciate it. Good point, Hill Dog. Genesis keys burned and most decentralized. Yeah, not a lot of ecosystems can say that. But what I was hoping, actually, when I saw Charles at SpaceX, was that this was actually sort of a lobbying activity. I hope what was happening was that Charles was doing some kind of a deal with SpaceX. And it was actually, the purpose of the deal was, probably something to do with SpaceX, but I was hoping it was just a way for him to get a little bit closer to the Elon Musk group of companies for the that eventual day when X starts incorporating cryptos directly into X.com. Because I think that's going to be, when that happens, that could be a gigantic adoption event like we've never seen before. Like, on this channel, I talk a lot about, what a gigantic tidal wave it would be for a Google or a Facebook to adopt crypto and instantly just provide, basically a crypto wallet for every single one of their users by default. X.com is the same kind of tsunami of adoption, but it's somebody we already know loves crypto. we already know Elon loves crypto. True, he loves Doge, and he's been involved with, like accepting Bitcoin for Teslas, all those kind of things. We don't know how he really feels about Cardano. We really don't know. But we know that Elon is already sort of sympathetic to crypto. Maybe that's really the big adoption wave. Maybe that's the big Pokemon Go moment. Maybe that's the big adoption wave we've been waiting for all these years. And maybe it's just been sort of unfolding in the shadows, but it's going at such a slow pace. Nobody realizes it. We've got Elon Musk. He's running Tesla. He's running SpaceX. He's got the Boring Company, if that's still a thing. He's got X.com. He's got XAI. Dude's got a lot going on, but maybe that's the big adoption event. And what I actually hoped when I saw Charles down at SpaceX was that he was, sort of premeditating, the position he wanted to be in with that sort of Elon Musk group of companies when that happens. So that's what I actually hoped was going on there. So I wouldn't mind if, I wouldn't mind if the next big partner for Cardano is just X. I think that would be an excellent next partner. Can you sing me a lullaby about how Cardano is going to help me get it if the test race? Monster Plod. I'm not sure I understand the question. Oh, get it if the rat race. You followed that up if the rat race. Get out of the rat race? I think this whole channel is a lullaby about how I hope Cardano gets us out of the rat race. So, yeah. That's the dream. I think that's the crypto dream for a lot of people. Like, I think most of us are on board for kind of the mission of crypto to sort of like make things better for human beings. But also, I think a lot of us would love not to go into the fiat mines every day. I think that's a legitimate goal of our involvement in crypto as well. So I would say this entire channel is that lullaby. Okay, Hosky incentivizes small pool delegation through the rug pull program. Speaking of which, 10 new ones will replace 10 of the existing ones. AOS, I would maybe look into that. Yeah, no, I've had people sending me messages about that this week. I'm just not a meme coin guy, guys. I actually enjoy a lot of Hosky's posts on X. I enjoy a lot of Hosky's takes. Seems like a very reasonable character in a lot of ways, but I'm just not a meme coin guy. I understand why pools would want to become associated with that kind of program, but I'm just not into meme coins. It's just not it's not a part of my interest wheelhouse. So Wade Robinson, every time I think Charles is hinting at a possible partner, he talks smack about them. A couple months ago, he dissed Elon. I say this, but I'm a huge Charles fan. I really think he is historical. Yeah, no, I mean, Charles is a complex character. I mean, he's the hype man in chief. I feel like we're talking about it. It's kind of like we're talking about the Macho Man Randy Savage if he was a math guy. If the Macho Man Randy Savage was a math guy, it's sort of like, it's kind of like, why is the Macho Man saying bad things about Hulk Hogan? And I don't know. It's part of being the hype man in chief. But no, I agree with what you're saying. Absolutely, though. I remember one of the funniest, one of the times I was most amused at a Charles AMA was the first time, and this was years ago. Somebody asked him about Teslas, and his response I'm paraphrasing here. This is a long time ago, but his response was something like, Teslas basically suck. The manufacturing quality is terrible. Like basically like Cadillacs or where it's at or something like that. This is back in the day. A lot of you will remember this when he used to talk about his Lamborghini tractor, how he wanted a Lamborghini tractor. This is before he had an actual Lamborghini. But he was talking about how Teslas sucked. And I was just like, and this is even before half the world hated Elon over his stance on gender, his various stances on gender identity. This is even before everybody hated Elon. And Charles just came straight out. He's like, Teslas suck. Here's why. I was like, I was like shocked. Hill Dog remembers this. He's all about his Cadillac SUV. Yeah, he was like all talking about how Cadillac was where it's at, and I was like, man, this is exactly not what I expect. um, yeah, hey Thomas, I made a big post about it just a couple nights ago. I made a big post about the stablecoin liquidity proposal. Any updates on projects building on Cardano? Will you be doing a separate video? Tell me what projects you want to hear about. What projects are you guys interested in? Let me know in the comments, even after this video. Feel free to just go on the page for this video and let me know what projects you guys are interested in. We have a lot of projects that get funded every single Catalyst round, and there's so many it's hard to keep up with. It's easy to look through the proposals and see names. It's hard to tell who's actually, it's very hard to distill that down to what are the exciting projects, who's going to build what. It was a lot easier back in the day because we had way fewer people building things in Cardano. I'm super glad where we're at today. I'm glad we have so many more people building things, but it's hard to keep track, and I don't necessarily want to just go through and pick out the ones that are interesting to me, because until they get to a certain level of development, it's super hard to tell who's real, who's going to be a rug, who's just straight up fleecing the community, who's, out there building in silence and building the next great project. It's super hard to tell. Macho Math Man. He's like, it's like the Macho Man Randy Savage, but he was super into math and not wrestling. Stuff IO is building a layer 2. That's interesting. So okay, this is I think this is a really fundamental topic. When do you think the Bitcoin DeFi dream on Cardano will materialize? So I don't think we know. So it was very exciting when Boss, when those guys first showed up and they were like, hey, we were able to validate a ZK proof on the Bitcoin blockchain. This means we can have this bridge to other blockchains, and all of a sudden all these new things became possible. So that sort of conceptual innovation, and they actually executed on the concept. Like, them executing on that concept, that innovation was super exciting. Then after that, the information about how long it would take to actually build something out there, how long until that actually materialized, that part got real hazy, because we sort of had those guys who are sort of building their own thing, and they obviously understand that Cardano is UTXO, so Cardano is a natural candidate, for Bitcoin DeFi, and probably the easiest place to build that because UTXO and EUTXO. But at the same time, those guys don't seem super sold on Cardano. They're not like Cardano first guys. They're not super deep in Cardano. They're a lot of the things I see them coming out, are sort of like, no. I mean, it's not really that part, but it's sort of like, this could be done with a variety of ecosystems. They don't seem super entrenched in Cardano. Then I saw IOG saying, they were maybe going to build their own thing. So it's become like very unclear what the end state of that looks like. I think the end state of that is Bitcoin DeFi on Cardano one way or another, but how long that takes, like the timeline and who's actually building out the thing that's going to be exciting, that's really unclear to me, because those original guys who the original innovation was sort of attributed to, they don't seem like they're only eyeing Cardano. So somebody can correct me if I'm wrong. That's just my perception for what I've seen. Maybe there's a lot of stuff I haven't seen, but that's my perception. They don't seem solely focused on Cardano, nor do they have any responsibility to be. And then at the same time, you sort of got, it seems like IOG is maybe building something, but as far as timeline, I don't think we know anything. I don't think we know when that could happen. I would certainly say that if anything, that's a 2029 thing, not a 2025 thing. But I'd be happy to be proved wrong. If somebody comes out tomorrow and says, hey, here's Bitcoin DeFi on Cardano, I will be the first one to stand up and applaud it if it's real and substantial. Definitely happy to be proven wrong on that one. I'm interested in hearing more on Hydra and how it's going to speed up transactions. You've mentioned it before. So I covered that in the last week. Hydra, so I think Hydra is fantastic. I'm so glad they built it. The Doom demo with its incredible transactions per second speed was very impressive. But, going clear back to the Bitcoin days and the Lightning Network, I've never been like state channels. Hydra is basically a type of isomorphic state channel. And the isomorphic nature of it is like a cool innovation, that the same logic works inside the state channel that works on the base chain. That's super cool. I think we should have state channels. I think that version of state channels is very cool. Do state channels get me super excited? Not really, because most of the use cases for state channels, it seems like it's great for certain things where you've just got a limited number of people who are going to be transacting and they don't care about decentralization within their state channel. It seems like it's great for that. Do I like picture it impacting me, super strongly in one way? Maybe if there's some gaming application of it, like with Doom, like if one of if a big Cardano game or metaverse, is incorporating state channels in some cool way that makes it run super fast, but still, be able to settle on chain eventually, like that'd be cool. But a lot of the use cases for state channels don't get me really excited. What does get me really excited is input endorsers and Laos and speeding up the base layer. That's what gets me really excited. Again, I love that we have Hydra. Super excited that's happening. But the thing that gets me really excited is Ouroboros Laos, which is input endorsers and the base layer. Macho Man Randy Savage, you're going way back in time. Yes. And I'm not one of those people who was a big fan of pro wrestling at all. But if you grew up in the generation I did, it would have been impossible for you not to know about the Macho Man. I actually know nothing about Viridian. I don't know anything about Viridian. Please feel free to let me know. I will search that later, but I don't know a damn thing about Viridian, to be honest with you. Okay, so we've gone for about an hour, and let's see, I meant to click on that one. Glad to see your videos. Straight up, this is my favorite YouTube channel. Thank you so much, Decentra Studios 16Q. Thank you very much for saying that. I appreciate it. What are your thoughts on Cardano not having a lot of exposure to the main stablecoins, USDC, Tether, Liberty Financial? This seems to be the strongest criticism of outsiders looking at Cardano. So this is something I've talked about a little bit over the last week. So I have maybe some unorthodox views on this. So there's an initial question. Okay, thank you. Okay, digital identity wallet initiative for identity management. Okay, I'll have to look more into that. I don't know anything about that, but thank you for exposing me to that to that project. Cardano Universe, thank you for joining. So, okay, so this is basically the question about tier one stablecoins, and everybody's asking this question lately for good reason, because here's how I think this works. So the big metric for blockchains over the last 5 years, which I believe strongly is the wrong metric. I made a whole video about this. I believe that TVL is the wrong metric, but TVL is certainly what people are focused on because it's measurable. It's an easy way to measure, and people think it's a measure of adoption, activity, value. People think it's just like a one size fits all measure for all those things. So I made a whole video where I said basically like we should dump that whole concept and go for something that looks more like total value liberated. I think crypto is about liberty. It's not about being locked. I don't want to be locked up. I don't want my ducats to be locked up. I don't want any locking V-type. I'm very much into freedom and liberty, not about locking. So I don't want my crypto locked up in DeFi platforms, but that's the metric. That's the metric we've adopted. So because that's a metric we've adopted, people immediately go to, okay, well, how do we increase total value locked? We increase use of DeFi platforms. How do we increase use of DeFi platforms? And then one of the answers is always, we need a tier one stablecoin. So the first question is, do we need a tier one stable? Should we go after a tier one stablecoin, or should we go after our homegrown stablecoins like Moneta? I'm always a little more pro Cardano, pro decentralization. So, promoting something like a Moneta seems a lot more decentralized than promoting a USDC. Not that I'm not saying that one protocol, the stable coins themselves are decentralized and centralized, but I'm saying everybody in the world uses USDC or Tether. The tier one stable coins are certainly, kind of like a single point of failure. And it makes more sense to me, I have a tendency to see something local to Cardano and I want to support that. But then at the same time, there's this question about, and I've talked about this in the last week on another stream, but there's this question: will these tier one stablecoins still be tier one when the thing I covered last night happens? And that's all of these banks: Goldman, Citibank, who was it? Santander, UBS, a bunch of huge global banks. There was an announcement they were coming together and they were going to have their own stablecoin, and they have a huge number of customers. They have a giant number of customers with a lot of money. So are USDC and Tether and Liberty Financial, are these really tier one stable coins? If we end up with a JP Morgan Chase coin and a Goldman coin, Goldman / Citi / the other 8 or so banks or whatever are involved, are our current crypto tier one stable coins still tier one in that future? Or do the numbers, the amounts of dollars, we would call it TVL, is the market cap of that JP Morgan Chase coin, that Goldman / Citi / etc. coin, is it so large that it makes even the idea of calling USDC a tier one stable coin a joke? In that kind of a world, things sort of change, right? Even the idea of centralized exchanges versus dexes, I think how we think about that even changes. If everybody is swapping in and out of JP Morgan Chase coin in their Chase account, things might change. I think the advent of Wall Street on the stablecoin scene could change things a lot. So yeah, that is, I think the lack of a tier one stablecoin is the biggest criticism in Cardano right now. But I don't know if, like, let's say a deal was struck with USDC tomorrow. Probably wouldn't even be USDC. It'd probably be something else, Tether or another one, whoever. We get a tier one stablecoin tomorrow. I don't know if it really changes things. I described it, I think, last night as sort of a chicken and egg problem. It's like people say we don't have enough DeFi platform usage because we don't have a tier one stablecoin, and people say we don't have a tier one stablecoin because there's not enough demand for the DeFi projects. I don't know. Certainly, getting a Tether tomorrow would, have an impact, but I don't. I think a lot of it has to do with the first mover advantage thing. And we were not the first mover in DeFi. In fact, Cardano was not the first mover with, expressiveness. We were not the first mover with smart contracts. It took us a while to get smart contracts. I think everybody remembers that period before the first Cardano summit, the Wyoming summit. We did not have smart contracts. We're all waiting for smart contracts. And then it was like, we needed the Plutus application backend. It took us a while to get smart contracts, and we needed that before we had any DeFi platforms. So I don't know. Basically, I would say I don't know if a tier one stablecoin is the cure all that everybody hopes it would be. Thanks, Jay Marie. I appreciate that. BlackRock is a monster. Larry Fink believing in Bitcoin is one of the most like unexpected things from my perspective. I guess Jamie Dimon of JP Morgan Chase, if he had made the Larry Fink transformation before Larry Fink, maybe that would have been the most unbelievable thing. But Larry Fink becoming like the biggest Bitcoin bull ever, and BlackRock becoming this monster that just can't gobble up enough Bitcoin, it's unbelievable. Yeah, this is the thing. I think people view tokens like ADA too much like a business stock or share. ADA lets you be part of a grassroots international digital nation that is treading new territory. Yeah, I mean, this is. I mean, that's sort of a good encapsulation of how I feel about this topic. I think a lot of people, and this goes back to what I said about the difference between people who watch channels like this, who are, comparatively very high information in terms of crypto, versus the average retail low information person who might buy, crypto on Coinbase. It's sort of the same thing as if they're just, logging into their Fidelity account, and they're picking things for their 401k. It's I think they do think about it like a weird tech stock, like a very niche tech stock. I think that is how they think about it. And I think a lot of us in crypto, definitely me, we sort of think of Cardano as this sovereign thing, right? This sovereign thing, like it is this almost like a nation state existing on the internet and in the form of cryptography and numbers. It's this whole new way to order society. I think, I like to think that that's how Satoshi thought about it too. Certainly, Satoshi was dissatisfied, Chancellor on the Brink in the Genesis block. Certainly, Satoshi was dissatisfied with the way society was currently ordered, and the cypherpunks as a whole, certainly their whole thing was there's a better way for us to order society through cryptography. So I agree. This is like the difference between, I mean, it might be 90% of people in crypto are just looking at the different cryptocurrency ecosystems like different tech stocks. And then there's the other 10% of us who are hyper involved in crypto. And I think a good portion of those hyper crypto involved people do think about it the same way you're describing and the way I think about it, that we're trying to create a new way to order society. It is sort of like an international digital nation. And those are two wildly different conceptions of the same thing. Okay. Citibank announced it will custody crypto in 2026. I use Citi, so I like the option like PayPal. Yeah, I think the Wall Street banks custodying crypto is definitely a good indicator of much wider adoption. Will we also probably rue the day that somebody in crypto, has a huge amount of their crypto being custodied by, some entity like Citibank, and all of a sudden they don't have access to it because Citibank, because TradFi institution. Yeah, I think both those things will happen. It's sort of like this great thing, like the Wall Street herd is here. That's an indicator of much greater adoption, mainstream acceptance. But also along with that comes all the TradFi stuff that we're also going to hate simultaneously. Why can't Cardano have Midnight in it? Why Midnight have to be separate from Cardano to be a partner chain? So the protocols are fundamentally different. So in Midnight, you can have shielded data and unshielded data. So it's we don't so Midnight is kind of like this thing. It's this euphemistic thing, right? It's like, what is Midnight? Euphemistically, we're like, it's a partner chain. But you know what we used to call that back in the day? We used to call those privacy chains. The problem is if you use the word privacy in front of regulators, they're going to pull out their ban hammer. They're going to hammer you into non-existence. At least that's what happened throughout the history of crypto. So what you will not hear a lot of people at IOG calling Midnight is a privacy chain. And, granted, it's kind of hybrid, like data can be shielded or unshielded, private or not private. And that's one of the big innovations of Midnight over, previous privacy chains. But it's really a privacy chain. And the whole point with normal crypto base layer blockchains like Cardano is that the entire ledger is permissionless and transparent and pseudonymous. So all the data's out there, right? It's like we know who owns that ADA. It's this account, and I can give you the name. I can give you the address of that account. So we do have a name for the holder of that ADA. It's the address of the account, but it's pseudonymous. We don't know who the real identity of that person is. Sometimes we do. Sometimes they make it known, it's disclosed in some way, or some connection is made because they transacted with a wallet that is publicly acknowledged as theirs or something like that. They've got their ADA handle in another wallet they transacted with or something. So sometimes we do know, but these base layers are basically transparent and pseudonymous, and that's the way Cardano was built. It's built to be a true cryptocurrency, a normal cryptocurrency base layer, and that's not the way Midnight. That's not the role that Midnight is filling. It's not meant to be 100% transparent. So they fill two different roles. This is part of the layerverse thing I was discussing last night that I made multiple videos on. It's like I think you want to have many layers on top of Cardano that make different compromises on the legs of the blockchain trilemma. And we can also add privacy as a fourth leg. We've got security, scaling, and decentralization. And I think privacy can be a fourth leg. And the layer in the layerverse that's going to do the privacy thing for us is Midnight. Yep. This is the problem with the ETF, ETP thing. It's the BlackRock hole. I like that. I haven't heard it put quite that way, but I think that's accurate. Okay. Jamie threatened his employees with termination if they bought BTC. Same time he was buying BTC offshore, according to reports. Jamie threatened his employees with termination if they bought BTC. Same time he was buying BTC offshore, according to reports. I wouldn't shock me. I mean, isn't this the way we see Wall Street working generally? That would not shock me at all. Mr. Tigger Monster. Ooh, isn't this the question? Isn't this the question on everybody's mind? So if your goal is not to round trip at this cycle, what metric are you watching? So I wish there was a metric. I wish it was just a Fibonacci. I wish I could say when the Ichimoku cloud looks like this, that is the time to sell so you don't round trip it. I wish it was like that. I wish Fibonacci's worked, but I don't think it really works like that. This goes back to, I would say, one of the big turning points for me in my not believing in Fibonacci's was when I read this article about, at the time, this article painted this person as the greatest trader in the history of Japan. And this guy's name, I've told this story before on this channel, but this guy's name he went by the handle on trading forums. He went by this handle, Death, right? And Death's thing was he was an RPG player. He had been an RPG player. And so his whole thing was, he's like, okay, this is like a little, side mission, and it's actually the main mission, but I'm going to prepare for this mission, when I need to have, when I need to have dry powder, I'm going to have dry powder. When I need to be full of, purchased assets, I'm going to be full of purchased assets, just like an RPG player goes out and collects, whatever, potions and tools and weapons, and then goes and does the mission. He looked at it that way. And he's like, the way I'm going to know how to prepare is purely based on sentiment. His whole thing was, I'm only going to look at sentiment. And there were a couple of famous events Death was involved in, one in particular where he made this unbelievable trade because somebody at a big bank in Japan fat fingered something, and he was prepared for it. He picked up on it, had the dry powder, executed the trade, and immediately sort of took his took his profits and ran, but he absolutely refused to go in for any of the chart stuff. He thought it was nonsense. And I was convinced by reading that article about death. I was utterly convinced. He'd like never given an interview before, ever. He'd posted on forums, and he met the interviewer in like the bottom floor of this giant building in like this coffee shop. And throughout the interview, like at some point in the interview, he reveals that he actually owns the entire building, and he like lives on in a penthouse at the top of the building, but he rents it to the coffee place. But the fact that he thought all Fibonaccios were nonsense and the only thing that mattered was sentiment kind of made sense to me. So what am I watching? I'm watching all the things, all the news that might inform sentiment. Because I think you can't really, there's so much like nonsense propaganda, and there's so much, like FUD and nonsense FOMO and crypto. You can't really gauge the sentiment by what people say. You just have to like watch. For me, I'll say what I do is I watch all the news, and I think about how that's actually affecting normal people who are involved, regardless of what they're saying. I don't watch what they're saying. I watch what I think they're seeing. So that's the metric for me. There is no Fibonacci. That's the metric. The Cardano priest lives. I am definitely not the Cardano priest, but Gaming BTC, I appreciate you being here, and thank you for joining and for commenting. I would definitely not characterize myself as a Cardano priest, but I appreciate you saying that. Glad to see the banks coming online. Yeah, me too. I think it's good. There's gonna be bad things about it, but I think it's good. Separation of ADA and Midnight also result of disagreements with Emergo and the CF. Yeah. Yeah, I believe that. There was a comment up here. Phil, Midgard versus partner chain. I would like to talk to someone and learn more about Midgard. I would love to talk to someone and learn more about projects like Midgard. I don't think I know enough even to comment, but I would like to learn more. Yeah, so this is kind of interesting. So I think there are good arguments on both sides. Should they be separate? Should they not? I think there are valid arguments on both sides. Very valid regulatory arguments for separation. I think compartmentalization is often very, very good for regulatory reasons. So for regulatory reasons, I think it's good to separate those two things, because one of them is probably more prone to regulatory attack than the other, and having some separation between them is good for that reason. But there might be some economic reasons why separation is not as good for Cardano. Yeah, that was pretty good. IOG is definitely on top of their regulatory game. I think that is very true. And a new unused claim wallet is helpful. Again, compartmentalization. Always with the Oxford comma. Always. You know why? I would like to thank my parents, the Pope and Mother Teresa. That is why always with the, I prefer to call it the Harvard comma. But yes, always with the Oxford comma. I think Elon, if you guys don't know what I'm talking about, it's this comma. He's talking about the comma after the duel in the image you're looking at right now. I think Elon has been pumping Doge all along. Do you see this Starship land in the water? And no, I have not. Did a Starship land in the water and explode? I haven't seen it yet. I would like to see it. Fair enough. Okay, you've convinced me. I won't shun this moniker any longer. You convinced me. Yeah, hit me on X. I'm on X. Just search my name on X. You'll see the logo, the same logo you see on the screen right now. You'll see that on X if you search my name, and you can send me an email, a message there. Okay, so I think we've been on an hour 38 now. I think it's a good time to jump off. People are bringing up some good things though. Remind me if you had a comment, if something here you wanted to talk about, jump on tomorrow night and remind me. We might have to go an hour earlier or an hour later tomorrow, because I've got somebody in Cardano wanted. Okay, sorry about. Can you hear me now? Sorry, we had a little battery loss there. It, it was a cliffhanger. Totally lost the battery. Apologies for that. I saw it approaching a very low number, and then we obviously reached the end. But I think, am I off grid? I am off grid enough. I think I'm definitely off grid enough that I lost a battery. But what I was saying was tomorrow somebody wanted to talk to me about something, and I thought it was worth. This person is definitely worth talking to. So I probably we're gonna move the meeting. Tomorrow. We're gonna move the video probably either 1 hour. I might be able to do it at the same time as normal, or we might have to move it an hour earlier. But I'll hopefully let people know early on. So I think since we're losing batteries and things like that, better call it a night. We've been on for 1 hour and 42 minutes. I very much appreciate everybody jumping on. Thank you so much for joining. And I hope everybody's having a great week. I hope the rest of the week treats us well. Hopefully, Xi and Trump resolve their differences. Hopefully, Jerome Powell just turns on the liquidity spigot, and everything turns out great for the rest of the week. But even if that doesn't happen, I'll talk to you soon.